What's up, everybody? Welcome to a beta seminar on the canopy theory. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started here. The canopy theory is the hypothesis, basically, that the Earth had a seventh layer to the atmosphere. So, this would be helpful to block out much of the harmful radiation of the sun. It can increase air pressure and saturate the plasma of your blood in oxygen, allow you to live a lot longer. The earth itself, is going to, be producing life that is bigger and lives longer than today. It's going to be, the world before the flood, much different than it is today. So I gotta find a way to share this screen real quick. I'm working on that. Here we go. The atmosphere of the pre-flood Earth had a canopy of ice levitated above the atmosphere. This canopy was struck and opened at the north and south poles. It could have been already opened, but it was struck and caused, probably everywhere, several holes in the canopy at the time of the flood when the Earth erupted, with supercritical water. Much of the water on the surface of the Earth today under the crust of the Earth before the flood rapidly erupting through a crack that was created, a rupture in the rock, and launching a lot of water, dirt, and rock into the atmosphere. And this would obliterate this canopy probably pretty fast. So this caused the fountains of the deep to produce clouds, which would condense at the points of low air pressure, which would be the windows. The Bible talks about the windows of heaven. Looking at the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were open. So that we know the fountains of the great deep is the subterranean chambers of water erupting from under the crust of the earth. But then the windows of heaven, I believe, would be these holes that were created in the canopy. And window, the original Hebrew meaning can actually be translated basically to chimney. And so it's like when you open your window, in your house, you're letting the hot air out. And so this is what's happening here at the time of the flood, where this hot air is escaping the earth. If you have double atmospheric pressure before the flood, this is rapidly escaping. And so that point of low air pressure is where all of these clouds will go. So as the earth is launching water into the atmosphere, it's condensing into clouds because of the cold temperatures of space. Clouds of ice and water and dust, and they're going to accumulate at the points of low air pressure already established above the atmosphere. So when there is high pressure, you can go outside and test this for yourself. When the meteorologist tells you that there's going to be warm weather, then you can guarantee that there's going to be high temperature, a greater atmospheric pressure. There's going to be high air pressure. Now you lower that air pressure, then you're going to have cool air. You're going to have clouds because it's allowing the heat and the moisture to collect and condense because it's not being spread out by the high pressure of the atmosphere. So again, in the canopy theory, the atmosphere of the pre-flood Earth had a canopy of ice levitated above the atmosphere. We'll talk about how it could have been levitated in a second. This canopy was struck and open at the north and south poles and cause the fountains to produce clouds, which would condense at the points of low air pressure. So heat resulting primarily from the fountains of the Great Deep melted the canopy, you know, during the 40-day flood phase. We don't know how fast this was, but I imagine, it was somewhere within 40 days that this was happening. And then you have all of that, uh, the massive clouds that will accumulate, ice clouds above the north and south poles, and then come down on those poles and rapidly cover it in ice. So the evidence of plant and animal DNA, along with their remains, clearly reveals an ecosystem of lush vegetation and tropical animals. The carcasses of the mammoth and rhinoceros, found in Siberia, up in the North Pole, American Philosophical Society. We know that the North and South Poles, that they used to be covered in lush vegetation, at least the North Pole was. The mammoths, that they suggest, were living in cold environments the whole time, is not true. They were tropical animals that were living amongst other tropical animals. According to Science Volume 253, recent Japanese study extracted longer strands of nuclear DNA, which showed the mammoth to be more closely related to the Indian elephant rather than the African elephant. And those are tropical animals today. Mammoth ivory is remarkably preserved, so it's something that was buried quickly by ice. There's even peppered tusks that have evidence of an extraterrestrial impact. Okay, particles of meteorites, basically, that have um, that have been imprinted into these ivory tusks, which in themselves are very well preserved. So the undigested food, in the stomach of the mammoth suggests that it was buried rapidly. It had to be frozen quickly at super high, or very super cold temperatures. So fossil forests. This is according to Energy Non-Christ. I guess that was a book written by Lindsay Williams. Though the ground is frozen 4,900 feet down from the surface, everywhere the oil companies drilled around the area, they discovered an ancient tropical forest. Now, according to the flood model, this is what the Earth would have looked like around 4,000 years ago. About 500 years after the flood, it's still a lot of it is covered in ice. And then I believe, and this is called the Younger Dryas impact theory, but they would put the impact of the glaciers at a much further date in the past, around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, is when they suggest that there was it's a popular hypothesis in scientific literature right now, which I don't know if it's made it into the scientific literature. I'm pretty sure it's been covered. But anyways, about 10,000 years ago, there was an impact. It caused the scablands in North America. And there was an impact of meteors on the glacial ice caps, causing them to rapidly melt and then flood the surrounding land. And so, according to the flood, this would have had to happen sometime, after the flood. Because before the flood, it's perfect conditions. After, it's rapidly covered in water and ice. That was about 4,500 years ago. But that ice will last 4,500 to 1,000 years, probably till the days of Peleg, maybe 500 to 1,000 years after the flood. So still going to be covered in ice, probably 2000 BC. That's about 4,000 years ago. And then it's going to rapidly melt, probably by a lot of that material that was launched by the fountains of the Great Deep, coming back down to the earth, 1,000 years later, basically. Give or take, I guess, a few hundred years. But it comes back down and then contacts the ice caps and rapidly melts them, causes major flooding, and actually forms the Grand Canyon, I believe, is one of the results of that. But the canopy was destroyed because of this launching of material. Now, if you go into the fossil record, if you go and you look at the fossil record for insects, um, they're in the Carboniferous era and they're giants. They have 2 foot wingspan dragonfly. There's a 7 foot long tarantula. There's like a man sized centipede. And that's because there was more oxygen, they suggest, at that time when the coal was being formed. Now, coal is just, massive vegetation that has been compressed by overlaying heat and pressure from the sediment on top, and it's converted into coal as a result of that heat and pressure, all that vegetation. And so, and oil is kind of the same thing, but it's with marine organisms that have been squished and converted by heat and pressure into oil or natural gas or what have you. But um, these insects, they have the ability to grow to this size because of the increase in oxygen before the flood, and the canopy is there to provide that increase in oxygen because it increases the air pressure. It traps that oxygen. At the original creation of it, it trapped all of that oxygen in the atmosphere. So a fact is that insects breathe through their skin, and large amounts of oxygen in the atmosphere allow the insects to grow bigger. Decreased oxygen would generate small insects because larger ones could not get enough air volume to. I can't believe what that, or I can't remember what that is. We'll move on. Air bubbles that have been found trapped in amber contain 50% more oxygen. The only trend in the recent literature is the suggestion of far more oxygen in the early atmosphere than anyone imagined, and that was according to 1, 2, 3 PhDs in a book that was written, Mystery of Life's Origin, 1992, on page 80. So we know that there was an increased, level of oxygen in the Earth's past. They would say it was many millions of years ago. But according to the Bible, this was before the flood, when there was still a canopy of ice. The Earth's layers today consists of 6 layers, the atmosphere of Earth today. Now, before the flood, theoretically, there could have been a 7th, which would be super cold ice, levitated by the Meissner effect. Now, you have to have a superconductor. That would be the super cold ice at freezing temperatures far below freezing, and then also containing possibly some magnetic properties. So maybe it wasn't ice. It could be some form of metallic hydrogen that's mixed in with the ice, giving it a magnetic property. But in either case, it could have been held by the Meissner effect, by air pressure itself is one possibility. So many ways that you could hold the canopy up there. But the Bible does teach that it's up there, and the scientific evidence does suggest that the atmosphere was much different in the past than it is today. It does suggest that the Earth was rapidly covered in ice at the North and the South poles. That would explain why it's not there anymore. But there's probably no ice caps before the flood, far smaller deserts, a single ocean, so mostly landmass. Today, it's 70% covered by water, and less than 50% is habitable by man. So the world was very different before the flood. I believe that is because of the canopy that used to be there. So now I'm going to share the other screen. There we go. Says in Genesis 5:9 that Enos lived 90 years and begot Canaan. So people were living a long time before the flood. They were living to be nearly 1,000 years old. You can graph it out. There's a genealogy that goes from the first man, Adam, and it goes all the way to Jesus Christ in the New Testament twice, I believe, or at least once in the book of Luke. But you can trace this throughout the whole Bible. You start in Genesis, go to Jesus, you'll find a list of names. You go from Adam to Noah. These are all people that lived to be nearly 1,000 years old. So how did that happen? How is that possible scientifically? What was different before the flood, where the average age before it was 912 years, and then after the flood it automatically drops off to 500, and then quickly over the course of 500 to 1,000 years brings human lifespan to just 120 years old by the time you get to Abraham and those guys. And then today, you're barely making it to 80 if you're very fortunate. Just got to get a drink here. So, what was different is the question. Let's look at a Bible verse here, real quick, though. Knowing this first, there shall come in the last day scoffers, walking after their own lust, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. That's 2 Peter chapter 3. They're saying here in verse 5, for this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. So what does that mean? What the word of God, the heavens were of old. They were created from eternity. God, who exists in eternity, who is outside of time, space, and matter, created it. Okay, the heavens. The first heaven where the birds fly, second heaven, outer space, third heaven, where God is, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. This is before the flood. It says, in verse 6, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. And so that world was standing out of the water and in the water. It means that there was something outside, there was something in the atmosphere that was a body of water, and I would suggest this to be some kind of canopy. It says there were giants in the earth in those days. Also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they bare children to them and became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So even after the flood, there continued to be giants for a while. And even today, there are some giants. So ancient burial mounds, especially of North America, definitely reveal that there were civilizations of giants, many of them. And the megalithic structures in themselves would seem to indicate that also, which are found all over the world. But there was something different, in the ancient times as a result of, the pre-flood world. It was created by God to be inhabited, had a canopy, I believe, that protected it. The heavens and the earth, which are now kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. That's the real reason people don't accept the flood, by the way. But let's move on. It says, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters, in Genesis 1:6. So there's a firmament in the midst of the waters. Firmament is an open expanse. Now, the word firm in firmament indicates a solid structure. And so what is creating the expanse is the waters beneath the expanse and the waters above the expanse, which would be a solid crystalline firmament, possibly super cold ice or metallic hydrogen. God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and the fowl that they may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. So we know the meaning to that word is a solid, or not, it's a open expanse. But an open expanse can only be created between, two solid bodies. God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the night from the day, So you're going to have a lot. Obviously, these aren't literally in the firmament like the flat earthers teach, but they're outside in outer space, shining as little dots in the atmosphere. The heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament sheweth his handiwork. God made the firmament, divide the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. Genesis 1:7. That is the creation of this theoretical canopy. You can even look at the historian Josephus, a military Jewish leader around the time of the Roman Jewish War. After this, on the second day, he placed the heaven over the world and separated it from other parts, determined it should stand by itself. He also placed a crystalline firmament round it. So, according to this, the ancient Hebrews were teaching, some of them at least, that there was a crystalline firmament around the world before the flood. The Earth's atmosphere today has 6 layers, and it may have had a seventh before the flood, possibly being suspended by the Meissner effect, where you take a magnet and you levitate it above a superconductor, something that's highly magnetic. Now, they do this with maglev trains in Japan and get their trains to go super fast. There's even ice clouds from the NASA launching vehicle drift from one space station to the Arctic poles within a day and hover in the atmosphere. That was for an article from astronomy.com that, gas clouds naturally, or ice clouds, just hover in the atmosphere sometimes. So there's a canopy of water overhead and then water underneath the crust before the flood, providing a huge landmass, mostly landmass on the entire planet, small bodies of water, and perfect conditions for everything. The Bible says that he founded the earth upon the seas and established it upon the flood. So most of the world today that we see covered in water, all that water, most of it at least, was under the crust of the earth before the flood. To him that stretched out the earth above the waters. So that would make sense. The earth is like a balloon being filled with water and it's stretching. So there's an ice canopy that allows for increased air pressure. There is the outer crust, and then underneath that crust, there is the subterranean water chambers. In the 600th year of Noah's life, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So notice the two elements there: fountains of the great deep, which is coming from the bottom, and the windows of heaven, which is up top, opening up. I believe that to be the canopy theory. And then rains for 40 days and 40 nights. The flood lasts for about a year in total after the rain stops, even. So this, right here, the mid-oceanic ridge is basically the crack, that ruptured the earth, and allowed all this water to escape. Well, the melted rock that's underneath it, the mantle, was allowed to spring upward as a result of that opening, because it wants to spring upward, but there's too much overlaying pressure, all of that rock and stuff on top of it, holding it down. The crust of the earth, many thousands of miles deep, it's holding it down. But if you were to relieve pressure, it could spring up, and that's exactly what's done. It's the mid-oceanic ridge, wraps around the entire earth, the world's largest mountain range, and it was created from the global flood. And all of that water and stuff that's launching in the atmosphere comes back down to the earth and creates the strata, but also creates the ice on the north and south pole. So, anything that froze was most of everything that got into outer space collected as ice and fell down on the north and south poles. The rest of it went beyond Earth's orbits and developed Earth's orbit, rather singular, and it developed. All of that rock and debris developed into comets, meteors, asteroids, and trans-Neptunian objects. But everything that fell back down to the Earth was super cold ice and hail, and covered the north and south poles. This is a layout of what it could have looked like right after the flood. The total ice sheet coverage of the planet, coming clear down to Kansas City, Missouri, over to North America, covering all of Europe and parts of Asia, even. So the fountains of the Great Deep erupt. They start to break open the canopy, but there's also natural holes probably already there at the North and South poles. Um, you have a lot of clouds developing on the North and South poles, which is just the lowest point, the point of lowest air pressure where these windows are. So when the fountains of the Great Deep break open, seems Bible seems to indicate that the impact was very great on the North and South poles in those regions, allowing windows to open and all of that hot air to begin to escape, and then cold air to collect in clouds at the North and South poles, and then they would come down and bury the Earth in ice. Back to the environment that the canopy theory would have provided. There's scientific evidence that there must have been something different about the ancient world, much different than ours today. When the global flood would indicate that that is the reason why. That the planet was created by God, that it was perfect, it was mostly landmass, and then it was flooded. People ask the question, where did the water go to flood the earth? Well, you just look around. There's water everywhere. But a new theory suggests, according to International Falls, Minnesota News, a lack of oxygen and not asteroids killed the dinosaurs because of the fact that a 80-foot long apatosaurus known as a brontosaurus had a set of nostrils about the same size as a horse. So it really, with how big it is, it cannot get enough air. It physically can't respirate enough oxygen into its lungs and enough air in general. It can't get it into its lungs because its nostrils are too small. It only has nostrils the same size of a horse. So it's going to be lit on fire just from the friction whistling in there. You can't get this animal to survive in an environment that has today's level of oxygen. But they say the dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago. The coal where this increased oxygen is found in the atmosphere uh, is over 100 million years old or something. So it's too far back in the past. So what they have suggested is that the dinosaurs have sort of holes in their thigh bones larger than those of mammals. And this is similar to the holes that the birds have in their bones, allowing them to absorb more oxygen. So that's the only legitimate theory I've heard of. It could be that, or it could be that they lived in a world where there was more oxygen, that they were living, on a planet on this planet. They were living here at the same time that all that coal was formed. The coal and the dinosaurs were both buried by a global flood. Before the flood, the oxygen was at least doubled in what it is today because of these air bubbles that you found trapped in amber in these like a fossil fly in amber, and then there's air bubbles in there. According to this article, 50% more oxygen, possibly. And then I've showed this already, but 3 PhDs in this book, far more oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere, early Earth's atmosphere, than anyone imagined. Here's a 1-inch length bump. I guess this is just a honeybee. And then there's a 2-inch grasshopper. It's an ant the size of a hummingbird. It's a man-sized centipede, 7-foot-long tarantula. And that'll join you in the front seat if you hit that going down the highway. So there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. This is how the earth receives its nourishment before the flood. Be all of that water that's under the crust. It naturally just saturates and comes up in the form of a mist to water the planet and grow the vegetation. Stoma in plants, with cells that act like pores on the plant, on the leaves, and they will open up actually like in the morning at the frequency of bird chirping in order to allow more sunlight in. And so it's kind of like waking them up in the morning. You play a certain frequency and you can allow that stoma to open up. Other natural ways to open it up, but that's one of them. There was this one guy who was playing music to his corn stalk, and the neighbors thought he was loco, like his elevator don't go all the way to the top. This guy's nuts. But he got it to grow over 15 feet tall, his corn stalk. And so 5 squash per leaf instead of 1 is another result that he got. Here are some acorn leaves to the left, the regular acorns, and then others that were grown by a process known as what is it called? Sonic bloom. So a gardening method which tries to simulate a more perfect soil condition. And so, increased minerals and stuff that you basically spray onto the soil. And they got these giant acorn leaves. They got potatoes that, are like bigger than a Gatorade bottle. They have cantaloupes the size of soccer balls. They have lemons, 4 or 5 times the size of a normal lemon. So before the flood, with, a layer of water blocking the sun's harmful rays, or a layer of ice, whatever it was, a canopy blocking the sun's harmful rays, this is going to eliminate a lot of the effect that those harmful rays have just on biological life. X-rays will go through your skin like bullets from a machine gun, and the subcutaneous layers, the what do you call it? The integumentary system is going to wear away eventually. That's why we get wrinkled. Job 16:8. So you're going to eventually look like that because of the fact that the sun is just like killing your skin cells, and eventually they will begin to lose the battle, and then everyone will start to notice. But Genesis 1:30, to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I've given every green herb for meat. So before the flood, there was no eating meat because the animals were peaceful, and there was no need to eat meat because the vegetation was good enough. Whereas today, it's kind of less nutritious. It's not as good as it was before the flood, because the earth has been cursed as a result of the global flood. But before the flood, there would be all of the animals themselves are going to be vegetarian. God said, behold, I give you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. So it says specifically there, you're going to eat the vegetables. God blessed Noah and his son, said to them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth. So after the flood, the animals are no longer peaceful. They're actually running away from the humans. They're scared. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, and as every green herb have I given you all things. So initially it was a green herb. It said, even as a green herb, I've given you all things. So this is God talking to Noah after the flood, saying that he is now establishing meat for food, just like he established the herbs before the flood. Just because an animal has sharp teeth does not indicate it is a meat eater, because all animals were meat eaters, were vegetarians before the flood. Just because you can find an animal today with sharp teeth doesn't mean that God created meat-eating animals. This is a bamboo's teeth, or not bamboo, good night, a panda bear's teeth, and it eats nothing but bamboo. Here is a water deer. I believe this is what this is, with sort of saber-tooth teeth on it, and it uses those actually to dig down into the roots. So here's a fruit bat, also very sharp teeth, you know, but it doesn't eat meat. So this situation right here is something that happened after the flood, when the animals no longer have, you know, necessary supplements in the wild and they're forced to eat each other. That's what happens. Before the flood, it would have been very different. Under double atmosphere from the canopy, you can have, a saturation of oxygen in the blood plasma. And this can be beneficial. You can simulate this with hyperbaric oxygen chambers, two little chambers that you put people in, and it increases the level of oxygen and the air pressure, saturates the blood in that oxygen, and then you get promoted healing, like baby Jessica McClure, who was trapped in an 8-inch whale for 58 and a half hours in Texas in 1987. So that's very scary. But they were able to actually restore her her arm, I guess, and she may have lost a pinky toe, but they did it by putting her in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. It's a famous story back in the day. Both her leg and her foot were saved. Hyperbaric oxygen chambers are known in Nevada hyperbarics to cure several conditions, or to at least promote the healing, better healing of those conditions. Virtually all stroke victims are treated with hyperbaric oxygen chambers in West Germany and England. They're using it to treat multiple sclerosis. So before the flood, you have less harmful radiation, more nutritious, more nutrition-rich plants, 50% more oxygen, and increased air pressure. And all of this coal is evidence that there was a tropical planet that was rapidly buried, and then converted by that overlaying heat and pressure of a global flood that flooded the whole planet. That's the best explanation for that. The massive coal seams all over the world are, indication. They done a study one time, and we know that if you took all of the forests in the world today, you took all the world's trees, and you put them all in a pile and convert it into coal, it would come nowhere close to the amount of coal that is in the earth right now. But that's how you produce coal. So either this planet has been producing trees, which are dying and slowly getting covered by dirt and rock and over millions of years, or this was one catastrophic burial of entire ecosystems of massive trees, that grow much larger than they do today, and the planet, which is mostly landmass. So there's going to be a lot of trees. And by the way, the beavers are going to be bigger too, because you got bigger trees, you need bigger beavers. But the point is that the coal was formed by a global flood. There are artifacts that have been found on coal, like this bell found in a lump of coal. It's a man-made object. Okay, if coal was, forming at a time when man didn't even exist, millions of years ago, when there's just like basically insects roaming the planet, then that's strange, because we find a bell in there. Got a cast iron pot was found in a lump of coal in 1912 at the Municipal Electric Plant in Thomas, Oklahoma. 140 million year old Cretaceous limestone containing a man-made hammer. That coal is not millions of years old. We know that the ancients, were advanced, and far more advanced than mainstream gives them credit for. But this is a Egyptian drawing of what is obviously a light bulb. So this is electricity. You can see the coil underneath the light bulb there. You can see everything there. You can see the wire. So there was a a battery that's found in Baghdad. It's a workable battery. But the point is that the man has been around for and has been intelligent and advanced, even knowing how to work with electricity for a lot longer than science is telling us. And if you go back before the flood, where there were giants, where people were living to be nearly 1,000 years old, when there was a canopy that was protecting them, enabling them to live that long, when the first man was created pre-programmed from God. He has an IQ off the charts. He's able to walk and talk and name the animals and get married all in one day. It's absolutely phenomenal, and he taught that to all of his kids. You can learn a lot in 1,000 years, and you could also have a lot of kids. And so here we are. But the point is that the intelligence of the ancients displayed here on this Egyptian drawing, it is best explained by people that were created by God. The Gwambaya artifacts show what they labeled as a stylized insect, but it's obviously an aircraft. And the Bible talks about, like, Tubal-Cain, an artificer of brass, and then it talks about people making instruments. So you already have civilization before the coal and the oil and any of the geologic layers were established. This was all existing before a global flood. And what made it possible was, God, first of all, who created it, and then it lasted for as long as it did, nearly 2,000 years, that pre-flood environment, because of that canopy that protected it. This canopy where there was probably no ice caps, far smaller deserts, a single ocean, so the world is mostly landmass, and it's filled with intelligent civilizations. 70% covered by water today, and less than 15% is habitable by man. God formed the earth to be inhabited, the Bible says. So this is a representation of what it could have looked like in the pre-flood world, with highly advanced humans, and then they were all destroyed by a global flood, and only 8 people were saved from that flood. They repopulated the world, which was now mostly covered in water. It's a complete catastrophe. Lifespans are dramatically shortened, but they're still going to have the intelligence of the ancients because of Noah and his boys, and they're going to rebuild civilization, and it's going to be advanced. And that's because technology wasn't invented. It was just known. It was just taught. It was just passed down. It was never learned. It was learned, but not over time. It was learned all at once. It was pre-programmed information that came from the hand of God. Adam passing it down to his sons eventually reaches Noah and his sons, and that's how the world was rebuilt. It wasn't anything that evolved. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female, created he them. That's what the Bible says. We didn't evolve from primates. So that is not grandpa. Even though what evolution, likes to teach, that we went from ape to man, that is a fairy tale. We came from the hand of God. We lived on this planet, for those first 1,600 years, I guess, and then there was a global flood, and then a reboot of humanity after that point, in a world that had been completely destroyed, where the planet was in a perfect condition because of this canopy. And I believe there's good evidence to suggest that, and then just the evidence of the pre-flood world in general. The evidence of the flood is evidence that there was a pre-flood world. The contents within all of the sediment and the fossils would show that world was completely different from ours. And it had to be destroyed by a flood. That's the most logical explanation, geologically speaking, even though that's not what mainstream would teach. That is the rational choice if you were to examine the situation critically, and I greatly encourage you to do that. Thank you for tuning in. Stay in prayer. God bless America. My name is Christopher Sylvius. Peace be upon you.